LSA GTS. How many K's on the thing? And we've just gone through and done another little upgrade, and probably where the guy's going to leave it for the moment. He really doesn't want to take it into balls and all car. He wants to take it to where it's a nice to drive, nice to use, but enhanced what it's got with a nice sound and working nicely. So we had done a 10% pulley, then we did a catback exhaust, now we've done an air cleaner, we've also done a custom reservoir for the intercooler system. Now, in touching base on the intercooler, the reservoir of the intercooler, I don't expect any outright power. There may be a little more stability in the power, and one of the things that you'll tend to find in the way this system is set up, where there is no reservoir, is that what can happen, more so when you're revving it harder and over revving the compressor and things like that, but essentially you can find a point where you start to boil, create cavitation, create boiling in the actual heat exchanger on top of the supercharger as the hot air goes through it, and that can end up with bubbles in the system, which then go straight down to the pump, and in the pump you can actually end up where you're starting to create air. So you can end up where all of a sudden, for a while there at least, they become a little unstable in their temperature, and they'll start to get hot spots and not quite so consistent on their power when they're getting worked very hard. The advantage of a reservoir is not to create any more power than the system working well. It's still got the same radiator, it's still got the cooler on top, it's still got the same water pump flow. The advantage it gives is twofold or probably threefold in my way of looking at it and what we've done for this guy. One is essentially it lets those bubbles come out, because we have about 2 litres of water in there. It's probably nearly 3 litres of water, 2.5 litres of water. And what it does is it pulls it out to where it ends up with a head of coolant ready to go to the water pump. So any of the bubbles and things that will be created when it's going through the hot spot on top of the engine are then getting taken out by the fact that it can stabilise in the reservoir to feed the intercooler, and you're less likely, well, you're not really likely to have those same cavitation areas where you end up with bubbles through things and a pump not flowing properly or having to bleed the system out, that sort of stuff. It's essentially becomes a self-bleeding system. There is another advantage in the simple side of things of you have more coolant, so there's more water to be able to flow around the place, so that's nice on that feature. The advantage I like about it is the ability to check. You can simply unscrew this cap. With the car running when the intercooler's flowing, you can actually see the water flowing around. You can actually just check it, you know where your level is. They'll change obviously from cold to hot, but you can actually check your coolant a lot easier than the way it's set up before. So you know your coolant's right, you can check all that. The last feature, which is a feature that I see as an advantage as well, and certainly for this customer it will be, is that it gets rid of an ugly blank spot that we've got here. It's exposed, you can see your radiator, you can see all your belts, and for a straight up engineering thing where you can see everything, that's nice, but for an aesthetic thing, it's a bit of a spot that looks like it wasn't finished under the bonnet. This, we've simply shaped this up to make it look as something that was supposed to be there. With a yellow cap on it, it really simply fills up that space. It's not trying to be show car, it's just trying to keep it neat and tidy and get rid of a bit of a blank spot that was in there. So essentially that's what we did there. We've also run the air cleaner and it's got a header upgrade, so it's got headers and cats. So the performance benefits were only subtle at this stage. Really all this stuff is ready to go camshaft and bigger pulley and push harder and go into the 600s, but in a real sense that's not where this guy wants to go, just wants to take this to this level. It was nice for us to go through and actually record all the details in these bits and pieces and be able to show you exactly how it comes up. So let's go over the graph and we'll show you what that stuff is. Okay, so here's this car step by step. You've already seen 3 of these graphs, but I'll go through it. It came in at the same sort of power that you'd expect in a near new tyres, LSA, quite common, the 420 horsepower the tyres. We didn't just do a tune at that stage, but I'd expect a decent increase. I'd expect to be able to get the 450, some of the 450, 460, maybe even 470 with nothing other than a tune. We didn't go through that process with this car. It went straight to just a 10% pulley. So standard exhaust system, standard air cleaner system, standard injectors, standard everything, about a 10% pulley, so a different belt, a 10% pulley and a full tune. And you can see that's where the big bang for the buck happened out of this. Everywhere from right down the bottom, so right down the bottom there, it's talking in the 20 horsepower, so really a bit over 20 horsepower, so 20% gain. Up through here, the mid-range side of things are at 5,000 revs. Your decent horsepower, 80 horsepower increase, and up to the top here where you're touching on 100 horsepower increase. If you look over at the boost graph, you can see where your increase came from. Very obvious place, very much where it should be, where it actually is just straight up increase in boost of a bit over 2.5 pounds, and it made the difference according to that. Beyond that, the differences are all pretty subtle. The exhaust system sounds better. It sounds even a little bit better still with the headers on it, but we'll go through that step by step. See, essentially the blue line was with the basically tune, the 10% pulley, and a catback exhaust. A good high flowing, quite a quiet one, a well muffled one, but a high flowing twin 3-inch exhaust system. And you see there was a moderate gain everywhere, around the 10 up to 20 horsepower right at the top, where it probably helped the most. Down the bottom there's gains as well, so there was basically gains out of just letting it flow, letting it get the air through easier. There were gains down the bottom as well, but horsepower right across the range out of the twin 3-inch in a fully tuned form. In the same place, we're seeing very similar, really no differences out of the air cleaner system, and obviously the intercooler, the reservoir, not that I'd expect one, but the air cleaner system made no gains, and the headers really made no gains down the bottom there. It already was flowing well enough with the standard headers onto the catback system. Up here from around the 4,500 revs onwards, there is a little breakaway. It actually gets away, it's actually making a little more, it's flowing a little better, which is what you'd expect, but it's flowing a little better. It says that actually the standard manifold and supercharged engine, which is one of the theories that are there, that air isn't being drawn out like in an NA engine, it is being pushed out. So as long as there's a big enough hole, the supercharger will push it out. Not the scavenge isn't quite as important. Ultimately it does become as important, but in this situation, standard manifold, standard cat was flowing okay. And up the top here, there is a gain. You see right at the top here, there is another gain again, and we're seeing some more horsepower. As for a bang for its buck, at this level, the headers aren't really worth it in the way of horsepower. In the way of sound, note, having it thoroughly done, having the right bit on the car, yes, it all makes sense, and it's a nice way to actually go. But in its horsepower, as you can see, the big gain was tune and a pulley. That's where the big gain came out of this car. It is now nicer, it's nicer to drive, it feels better, there's more throttle response, it flows nicer, it is great on the road. And as I said, I would also qualify that the intercooler reservoir saw no gains in this form. I would expect gains in all the places I saw. It's easy to maintain, you can see the coolant level, you can see if it's flowing, you can, and in constant beating, hard beating really onto it all the time, it's not going to have those cavitation issues where some of them you'll find. As I said, it's more once you're starting to rev your compressor up into the 22 and 24,000 RPM and really starting to spin your compressor, that you'll find there's a lot of heat, and that causes airlocks and things like that they'll find. This would answer that, but it also is an aesthetic thing. So last thing I'd say on that detail is that the horsepower figures we're looking at, these are rear wheel rolling road dyno figures with a good, honest, fair correction on them. I'm seeing there is information out there of talking a lot higher horsepower out of these systems with large camshafts and things, but unrealistic amounts of horsepower. Be wary of just looking at horsepower. Differences from start to finish is very important, but also there is essentially rolling hub dynos. A lot of people now starting to advertise the engine horsepower again, which is a lot bigger factor, so it changes the numbers a lot. Beware of what the numbers are when you're checking this sort of stuff out. This stuff here is all straightforward, rolling road, in a normal correction factor, and really the old speak of 10 years ago, whereas now it's starting to change a little bit, so just be wary of that. But this is going to be a great car, the guy should be very happy with it, really good horsepower, revving up nicely. By the way, these revs here we're taking this to with the headers, everything's going through there, is 6,800 RPM. The engine's doing very well up there, and like I said, this guy should be wrapped.